Thank you guys for tuning into my last video. For this video, we're going to expand the topic of agriculture, money that goes with it, and why I think it's the worst years on record. And what we're looking at right here is a gold price 100-year historical chart index. And this chart is in actual gold prices, which you can see there's a big flat line, which after 1933, Roosevelt made it illegal to own gold, besides for things like jewelry, and it was used as our money until we went to the fiat system in, I think it was 71, when Richard Nixon ended the gold standard. And you can see what happened to the price of gold thereafter. This chart right here is a US dollar index. This is only a 43-year historical chart. And you can see how the dollar went down for about 10 years in the 70s and then went way up to a peak, which was around 1985. And if you're a farmer, the farm crisis occurred right about in here, and right about here is where the prices collapsed. Now, as to why prices collapsed is, in a simple form, when the dollar's high, it makes grains cheap. And you can see we begin a decline. And 90s it's kind of peaked up. And this was the best years of agriculture right in here from about 2000 to about 2010. You can see what the dollar did. Now, what is the dollar index? The dollar index is nothing more than the value of the dollar, with the US dollar, against other currencies. Doesn't mean what it buys here in the United States. It means what it is for other currencies. It's the exchange rate. So the higher the peak, the more a foreigner would have to give in their currency to exchange. So if the foreigner wants $1 US, they may have to give 5 of theirs at a peak like that, just as a rough example. And you can see after 2010, right around the time it broke there in 08, what's happened to the dollar ever since. I also want you to note, right around this time frame was right around the peak time of agriculture. Now you're looking at historical average grain prices. This is across Iowa and probably put together basically off of futures. You can go to the ISU website and check this out for yourself if you're interested. And you can look here and you can look throughout the years, and this would be about where we went belly up and we went through the recession of 09, and you can see what happened coming out of that recession. And then look what happened on that chart where I pointed it out right about thereafter. So again, there would have been your recession, and then there would have been the printing, and then once that all got blown out of its system, look what happened to the dollar. Now in the videos where it becomes more interesting. You see what happens to the dollar as it goes up. But take a look at what gold's been doing lately. What's that tell you? Well, it tells me that the dollar against other currencies has actually increased, but against domestic pressures, in the United States, has lost all of its value. So I have a very long list here going back, and these are the years. This is the average yield for the year, nationwide corn average yield, and then you have the calendar average price at that year. And then we have what the gross would be. It's just yield times the average calendar price. It's that simple. And you go back here into the Great Depression around the 1935 area. So I picked about the worst year I could find of around 38. We're coming out of the Depression, ready to go into the war. And they were making about a gross of about $11.66. Then I went back in and I said, okay, let's take the 80s, the peak of the 80s, around 87. Let's look at the worst of the 80s, at the bottoming out of the 80s of about, $177 gross. Now, do you guys understand what a storehold of wealth is? And for the viewers that find this channel interesting, all about 6 of you, that don't know what a storehold of wealth is, a storehold of wealth means that money retains its buying power. That's basically what it means. And gold would be a prime example of that. So if we take the year 1910 and we take this little dot, which is a fleck of gold, and we exchange that fleck to buy a brand new hammer. The hammer at the store is priced at 10 cents. So this little fleck of gold was equal to that 10 cents at that time, buys the hammer. We fast forward to 1970. We use the same exact size fleck of gold, which now the hammer is priced at $2.50, but the same size fleck of gold buys the same hammer. Fast forward to 2025, the hammer is now $19. We use the same size fleck of gold, and it buys the same hammer. So what changed was it took more dollars, but the piece of gold remained the same. And that's what a storehold is. That retains its value. The dollar obviously lost value, so it took more of the dollars to buy the hammer. But the piece of gold bought the exact same quantity as it always did. So if you had a gold bar that's currently valued at, 1 ounce gold bar currently valued at $2,900. If your item was $2,900, you could go back and pick that same item throughout history, and it would buy the same thing. So, same quantity of gold pretty much buys the same thing throughout history. So, you run some very simple mathematics, and you look at those years I just pointed out, in 1939, and you're 1166 an acre gross, and gold was about $35. Well, if you figure that up, that was basically in the heart of the Depression. It took about 3 acres gross of corn to equal 1 ounce bar gold of gold. In 87, the worst of the worst is the 80s. If you figure that out, $177 an acre gross, that's literally the gross revenue coming off of 1 acre corn. Harvest a 1 acre of corn on a nationwide scale, nationwide price, take that in and sell it. That's what they gave you, $177. And then you look at gold, which had true buying power, $409 or so in that area, depending on the month in that same time frame. So that means it would have taken you, if you look at this, times 2 acres of corn, $354. Takes 3 acres of corn, 531. 2.5 acres is 442. So you can see somewhere around, it took about 2.25 acres of gross corn to buy an ounce of gold. Look at the year 2024. And you got a nationwide average of about $179 and an average cash price of about $440. And gold hovered around $2,600. So that takes about 3.5 acres of corn to go out and buy that 1 ounce bar of gold. So what this tells you is the amount that 1 acre, the gross volume of corn being sold, that's your dollars gross. Then you convert that to gold. And gold's the truest inflation hedge there is. Now what do I mean by that? Like I said, gold retains its buying power throughout history. So as your dollar goes down, it takes more dollars to buy something. As your dollar becomes more useless, it takes more of them to buy something. Gold remains the same. Gold retains its buying power at any time. So what you're seeing by this number, what you're seeing on this chart here as gold goes up, and by the way, gold actually did not go up. Gold never went up a bit. What actually happened here was the value of the dollar went down. This should just be flat line, and it should show the dollar in relation to gold. But the buying power of the dollar went down. Meanwhile, the dollar against other dollars or other currencies actually went up. So as the dollar goes up, the price of grain goes down because it's an exchange rate for foreigners. And if an exchange rate for foreigners, if they have to go looking to spend 2 of their dollars to equal 1 of ours, they're going to look for a vendor that has a dollar for dollar exchange that doesn't require such an exchange rate. So the higher the dollar, the more it kills their exports. But the higher the gold, the more here in the United States our dollar has lost in value. If you look at 1975, the corn producer took his 1 acre of ground, produced corn, sold that corn, equal to total revenue about $230 an acre. Gold that year was averaging about $165. So in other words, 1 acre of land equaled more than an ounce of gold in revenue. And as I just showed you, it takes 3.5 acres now to even get 1 ounce of gold. So in other words, it takes 3.5 to 4 times the amount of acres currently being farmed to have the same revenue as it did to have the same buying power as in 1975. And the interesting thing on this gold chart on this particular website here, which is Macro Trends website, but you can just click this box and it'll show inflation adjusted, and you can see that gold is right about the top. Does that mean it's going to keep on going up, or does that mean it's topped out? And that was last set about 1980, right around the peak of the farm crisis. So does that tell you that the grain prices are going to start going down? Does that tell you that the dollar index is about to start going up? I don't know. I don't know. Now, if you were to average this all out and you start to map long-term trajectories of the dollar, are we already there? Are we already peaked out? I mean, it looks like we're in a long-term downtrend, even though we're actually appreciating over other currencies. And you can tell there's usually about a 10-year period where it goes down and a 10-year period where it goes up, and some a year period where it goes down. 2000, 2010, 10 years. You know, so we're past due to have a downtrend, which should mean we're on the cusp of a dollar drop, which is generally inflationary, but at the same time better for exports. If you're a grain farmer, usually these times are better than these times. Now there's a key piece to that whole dollar index. January 2012 is when the monetary system, FOMC, adopted their 2% inflation mandate. The Fed has a dual mandate. That's basically a guideline they try to follow. Maximum employment and 2% inflation target. And that was adopted. This is the dollar index chart, but it was adopted right about in here. And look what happened to the dollar ever since. And look what happened to cash grain prices ever since. And what happened to gold after that 2% mandate? So that would have been right about in here. And then this right in here would be COVID. When you look at all these prices and you see this dollars going up and you start to get down here, you're like, well, that's not so bad. But in terms of buying capacity, meaning how much did that money go purchase? What could you do with that money? It's the worst it's ever been. That's the reason you guys are farming with 4440s and not able to buy ground. That's the reason you've not kept up with inflation. And we'll talk about all this more in depth going forward, as this is a multi-part series. And thanks for watching.